First, let me thank Chairman Alexander for his support and assistance in getting us to this point. He has also, until I rotated off the Help Committee and onto the Finance Committee, been my chairman on the Help Committee. And so both in his work as the Appropriations Subcommittee chair here managing this bill, I thank him, and for all of his leadership on the Help Committee when I was a member of that committee, I thank him. As the Senate looks at this measure, I just want to try to explain it in as simple terms as possible, because I think this is a complete slam dunk win-win amendment. A next generation of nuclear power capability is being developed, and a great deal of the design of that next generation nuclear capability is being done here in the United States. Now, for a variety of reasons, those American designs are now moving to approval and construction in other countries, particularly including China. So I don't think it's a good idea for us to be designing new technologies but have them deployed in other countries. So we're trying to address some of the hiccups that prevent this from going forward in the United States. Now, our United States Navy uses nuclear fuel all the time. I think it is widely known that our aircraft carriers and submarines operate with nuclear engines. They do so very safely. They do so with the expert support of our United States Navy. And at the end of the day, they generate spent fuel that gets taken off of the aircraft carrier or the submarine when the engine is refueled. And the question is what becomes of that spent fuel. What this bill would do is it would allow the Navy to give access to that spent fuel to our national labs. America's national labs are a science gem of global proportions. The scientists who work in our national labs are brilliant, they are extraordinary, they are at the cutting edge of a great number of issues and developments, and one of them is, guess what? Next generation nuclear power. So what access to the Navy's fuel would do is allow them, under the strict controls that are protecting our national labs, to begin to work through testing how some of these next generation nuclear plants might work. Why is it a big deal for us to look at developing in the United States this next generation of nuclear power? Well, one obvious reason is that it's carbon-free power. And we've already blown through 400 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That's way out of the range we've been in the entire history of humankind on this planet, and it will have all sorts of cascading effects in our climate, our atmosphere, and our oceans. So nuclear power avoids all of those ancillary risks of fossil fuel power. But the other problem is that we have been operating with old school nuclear power for quite a long time in this country, and we've built up a very substantial reserve of nuclear waste, of spent fuel. And at the moment, the United States Senate and the United States Congress, and indeed the United States government, has no plan for getting rid of that nuclear waste. There have been fights over sticking it in caves in Nevada, and there have been all sorts of ideas, but we do not have a currently operating plan. A great deal of that nuclear waste is simply stored at the power plant where the power was generated. That's a big liability, I believe. And I think that if we were to act as if we were a corporation and book the liability of the cost of having to safely dispose of all of that nuclear waste as a liability, it would get the company's accountants' attention. And they'd invest some effort into figuring out what the solution is to dealing with all those stockpiles of nuclear waste for which we currently have no plan. here's where the two lines converge. Because the next generation nuclear technologies carry the promise of being able to take our nuclear waste stockpile and repurpose it as fuel. Turn toxic, dangerous, multi-10,000-year waste with a huge liability attached to it into an asset, a power-producing asset. So to me, this is a very small investment in a potential solution to a very big problem. And I think that we can have considerable confidence that the United States Navy knows what it's doing in handling these nuclear fuels, and that our national labs know what they're doing in handling nuclear materials, and that the trust of the Navy and the trust of the national labs and the expertise of the national labs giving us the ability to actually create a potential solution to at least a significant part of our nuclear waste problem, that's worth the small investment that I hope my colleagues will be willing to make today. I want to particularly thank Senator Crapo, who has worked with me very closely on this whole nuclear innovation side. He is a real leader in this area. I'm happy to be his Democratic colleague working on this. I hope that with that explanation, we can come to a measure of agreement that this actually is a good, no-losers idea, and be able to vote on it tomorrow, and I hope have a very strong and successful vote. So with all of that, Mr. President, I will yield the floor back to the floor manager from the Republican side.